the big moment finally came, and well, the outcome is what we'll be talking about on Sunrise Daily this morning. Joining us from our Abuja studios live is Clement Nwankwo. He's the Director of Policy and Legal Advocacy Center and member, Civil Society Situation Room. He also monitored this particular election. Good morning and thanks for joining us. Finally, we're getting to hear from INEC that the elections are inconclusive. But before INEC's comment, you also said something concerning these particular elections.
Yeah, good morning. The news of INEC's conclusions has been breaking this morning. Obviously, we are all concerned about the situation with elections in Anambra State. The Situation Room, which is a grouping of more than 50 civil society organizations, we were deployed throughout Anambra State for the governorship elections. And we made statements at different stages based on the observations that were coming up at the different stages of the elections. The last statement that we issued was not very complimentary to INEC because we felt that INEC has again displayed a huge inability to deal with the challenges that we had observed from several elections that have been held in this country since 2011. INEC did make promises about Anambra being a litmus test for its preparations for 2015 elections. What we found was that with what happened in Anambra, we really cannot say we are ready for the elections in 2015. Indeed, we need to go back to the drawing board.
You know, perhaps maybe you should be more specific because after the Edo elections, we also saw the boat mishap in a particular community in Edo State and a couple of other issues which the electorates as well as the candidates raised in that elections. What did you see in Anambra? Was it a repeat of what transpired in Edo State, or did INEC successfully took it a notch higher than what it did in Edo State?
Well, when you look at Anambra, you really know and see that perhaps the problems were even more. And we've had elections since 2011 in the different governorships at Adamawa, Osun, and several of the other elections in the states. Again, the reports from the observers are the same. Complaints of, first of all, low voter turnout. There were some reports saying there was huge turnout. Absolutely no. In most of the polling units, there were less than 20% turnout. In the local government that has the highest registered voters, which is the Obaru local government, with 139,000 plus voters, you didn't have more than 32,000 people voting. 32,000 against 139, completely unacceptable. And this replicated itself across the different local governments in the state. Beyond that, INEC's responsibility is to deal with logistics. How much of materials were available on time? Even in Awka, which is the state capital where INEC's main office is, materials were not delivered in polling units until well into the morning. And then you can say what happens across the rest of the areas which are a bit more remote away from Awka. So the problem of materials, delivery of materials, result sheets, collation sheets, accreditation registers, this were not delivered. Officials were not deployed on time in several polling units across the state. When we saw a couple of officials, a lot didn't know what to do. So the issue of training comes up as well, that you didn't have election officials that were adequately trained. Then there was the case of political parties. Political parties were openly sharing money in polling units, and there wasn't any preparations to deal with the fact that election offenses can be committed at polling units. There must be a system where an election offender can be apprehended at the polling unit. The security services needed to have been trained and facilities provided to apprehend people who are committing electoral offenses at polling units. This wasn't in place, and the money is being distributed indiscriminately by parties in the polling units, which is completely unacceptable in a voting environment, or indeed in any voting process. So there were several issues of concern to us as election observers, and we quite frankly think that this election doesn't reflect a preparedness on the part of INEC ahead of 2015 elections.
Now, do you think that INEC, I mean, were you privy to any challenge that INEC could have faced in terms of deploying materials to certain areas?
I lost you there. But going back to the issues, I must say that there are the issues of deployment of materials really wasn't well done. The issues of election officials being properly trained wasn't well tackled. The voters register was again a major complaint. A lot of people didn't find their names on the voters register, and one of the cases, of course, which was the obvious case, was one of the governorship candidates of one of the parties who couldn't find his name on the voters register, who couldn't find the name of his parents on the voters register. In some local governments, and this is particularly going back again to Idemili local government, north and south, the issue was that a lot of voters whose names started with N and U and O couldn't find their names on the voters register. So you really have to go back to the question, do we have a proper voters register? And if we have this problem in just one state, where when you look at it, huge numbers of security personnel, election officials were deployed. When you do have those huge numbers deployed the way they were in just one state, and you have these problems, then you must really ask yourself, how would INEC perform in a general election where elections will be conducted in at least 30 governorship elections in at least 30 states at the same time, and of course National Assembly elections across the 36 states, and of course the State Assembly elections and the presidential elections. Given all of this, you must really worry whether we shouldn't go back to the drawing board and ask ourselves, what should we do to get it right? And I don't believe that conduct of elections is rocket science. Most countries, even smaller countries with lesser resources, have achieved much more.
Well, Mr. Nwankwo, I was just wondering if you were privy to any challenge that INEC could have faced, you know. I mean, because it seemed like all was going well to Thursday when we even spoke with the INEC commissioner there, and it seemed like everything was under control. Were you privy to any challenge that INEC seemed to have faced in the last minute?
Well, we did get indications at the beginning stage that things seemed to be on course, and that was especially because we were in the areas close to the INEC office. The initial statements that we issued said it looked like things were going well, even if there were delays in starting out. But once it went through towards the midday and the end of the day, all of those problems began to play out. And for us, it's really worrying. INEC has said that in a specific local government, its official in charge had committed electoral offense, and that they had handed him over to the police. The question is, what kind of arrangement would put the entirety of a local government arrangement, election arrangement, into one single hand? That doesn't show good management. They were deployed in Anambra several national commissioners, I think no less than 6 national commissioners. There were several resident electoral commissioners that were drawn from neighboring states. A lot of them were drawn. There were several election officials, the electoral officials, the EOs, that were taken from neighboring states. INEC had no problem of individuals on ground, given the figures it reeled out as deployment of officials. The question is, was anybody really in charge? Was anybody keeping an eye on what was going on? Was there a process that said, if this happened, this is what should be done to deal with it? I'm not quite sure. So this really worries a lot of us.
Well, let me come in here, because from your account of what transpired concerning the voter register, specifically some names totally absent from the voter register, and we're getting to also hear from INEC owning up to its member of staff sabotaging this particular process, coupled with what we have seen in other local government areas and polling units. Would you say INEC is right to have said the elections are inconclusive? Do you want to see a total cancellation, or the way INEC has put it?
I did miss the last parts of your question, but
okay, I'll take that again so that you get it.
Do we want to see a total cancellation?
Absolutely.
The Situation Room is just receiving the news of the supplementary elections being planned by INEC, and declaration that it is inconclusive. When we look at the voter turnout, 20% across the state, the question for us is whether you can safely say that a supplementary election would make any difference. I'm not sure. If you tabulate the number of votes left in or the number of registered voters in the area where elections were declared inconclusive, and you put it against the fact that you have had so far only 20% voter turnout. The question is, if 20% of the registered voters in those areas vote, what difference would it make? But again, the Situation Room would be convening in a discussion this morning to come up with a position on the issue. But on a general note, our point is really to note that INEC hasn't shown a preparedness for this, and if this plays out in what is likely to be a contentious general election in 2015, then the country is going to be thrown into an unnecessary crisis.
That is the thinking of a whole lot of Nigerians, and they said this is just one election from just one state, and we're getting to see all of this. Logistics has always been the problem with INEC in the conduct of elections, but don't you think that we have a peculiar case because of the state as well as the candidates, knowing that, they're all heavyweights? That is why we're getting this kind of results.
In every state, every election, everybody who is on the ballot is a heavyweight, because you must have come through some process that throws you up as a candidate for whatever party that you represent. But election is not about heavyweights. It's about the election management body. That's supposed to be the heavyweight of the election. That's supposed to be the body that wields the stick and wields the process and takes it to where it wants to go. Everybody's humbled before INEC, and so when you come seeking for election, you're humbled before the people, you're humbled before INEC, and people vote based on what they think that you can deliver. And INEC's responsibility is to impartially reflect the votes of the people and give the people confidence that when they come to vote, their votes will count. When INEC doesn't show that it is in a position to help the process and make it possible for the votes to count, then it becomes part of the problem.